Good evening, hockey fans. No, wrong one. Well, welcome to this gathering. My name is Alan Knight. For those of you who don't know me or weren't there the day I got railroaded into being president, I wanted to begin by making a few introductory comments and then turning it right over to Mary Beth and Bill Brown to make the more detailed presentations. But first, I wanted to make a few comments about the association, and just to say that we're here as a board of directors because you're here. We're all in this association, and we live here because it's a place we love. It's a place we need to take care of. And I think we are all here because we want to be conscientious stewards of this beautiful place where we happen to be lucky enough to live. And it's going to take some care. It's going to take some work. The board of directors that you have elected has, I think, this past couple of years been just extraordinary. I'd like to point out those folks to you for your recognition, but I just can't get over how talented a group this board has been and how much initiative they have shown. Someone had the idea of, well, why don't we do a video of this meeting so that the folks who live in Florida or like the Wiedemans who are in Arizona for the winter, so they can find out the details. So Dave Elliott said, yeah, I'll do that. And this is what you see back here. Dave is our vice president. I kid, he's the president in charge of vice. But he's been always there to stand up and step forward to do things. Maria Flores Siebert, our secretary, who could not be here tonight because she is ill with her, as is one of her children. She's been tremendous as a secretary, and she just volunteered and said, well, if you do the video, I can post it on the internet. I know how to do that. So, great, go for it, yeah. So that's all good. Norm has been stepping up and doing a really fine job as treasurer. It's a good board, it really is. And as always, Ward with his expertise on water resources and Mike with all of her good questions that she asks. And anyway, it's a fine group. I'm so happy. And tonight you'll see Chris Miller and Pat Huff, who will be carrying microphones back and forth to all of you if and when you choose to ask a question, so that all that can be recorded too. So it's a good group, and I'm glad you're all here. I want to make sure I don't forget some key points here. Yes, yes, that's right. Among the many activities of your board, many of them are social. Social activities are the glue that holds us all together and keeps us connected. So on February 1st, we are having what is our more or less annual roving feast. And it's a progressive dinner going from house to house to house to house. And Kim, did you give all those flyers to me or did you pass them out? Okay. And the one thing that's not on that flyer is the date. All the details are there except pencil in, please, February 1st.
This Saturday.
Right. And thanks to Kim and Mary Roberts for coordinating all of that. Thank you very much. So, what else have I? The topic tonight is an important one. It's about the lake. It's about the water quality. And as always, we have options. Aren't we lucky? We have options. One of the options is do nothing. We could do nothing. We could let the lake just continue to fill up with various washed-in nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. And we can continue to have more and more harmful algae blooms from DEC that scare the pants off everybody when they receive them. What does it mean? What do you mean we can't drink the water? What do you mean we should keep the dogs out of the water? Is that what we want? Well, if you do nothing, you can look forward to more of that. But then again, there are some options for managing the lake. And we know, and Mary Beth will explain, and Bill will explain, there are various sources of the nutrients coming into the lake that are essentially pollutants, phosphorus and nitrogen, that feed the algae blooms. Some of them are washing in from up the upper reaches of the watershed. Some are coming from our own backyards. Some is washing in from the roadside ditches. We know that for a fact. What we don't know is which ones are the most significant. Which is the big one? Which is the big culprit? Which is the little ones? Which ones demand immediate attention? Which ones can we procrastinate on? And sometimes while you're trying to figure out the realities of all this, opportunities fall into your lap that you didn't expect. In 2016, our Duane Lake Association Board of Directors had a communication, a correspondence with Roger Tidball. Roger, are you here? Roger, your town supervisor back there, and John Ganther on the town board. Said, is there any way you folks could find a way to your engineering firm do a feasibility study to examine the possibility of a sewer system around Duane Lake? And at our annual meeting, I forget whether it was 2017 or 2018, Mary Beth presented 3 different options of a possible way to create and finance a sewer system around Duane Lake. Very detailed study, quite exhaustive. And after due consideration, your board of directors said, they're all too expensive. We can't afford any of them. So it just sat on the shelf for quite a while. And until recently, a new opportunity perhaps has fallen into our lap, a way to make perhaps the simplest form of that sewer system a reality with significantly more state financing to assist us. And that's what Mary Beth and Bill are going to talk about tonight. When we're all done, we can ask questions, we'll get good answers, I'm sure, and then we'll also discuss ways of keeping in touch and discussing this further as we go down the road the next few weeks, few months to decide what do we want to do. That'll all be up for discussion also. One last thing before I turn over to Mary Beth and Bill is, I don't know how you found out about this meeting tonight. Maybe you are all already on our email distribution list or get the printed newsletter. But if you're not, if you happen to just see the billboard up there at the top of the North Mansion Hill, please make sure you sign this sign-up sheet that I'm passing around so that we have your email address so we can tell you, oh, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month from now, we're going to have another meeting, or there's going to be an emailed survey perhaps to gather your input and your ideas and your opinions about things. So if you want to be part of the process, please make sure that we have your email addresses. It'd be very helpful to all of us and to you too. Okay, so I'm going to pass around this sign-up sheet here that, I'll start over here if I may. If you need a pencil, I can add that too. So with that, I guess I'm going to ask Mary Beth to come on up and begin. And as I said, Chris Miller will be manning that side, giving you later on when our presenters are done, so that you can ask questions. And then I'll give this microphone later on to Pat so she can do that side. Okay, take it away.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Bianconi. I'm a partner at Delaware Engineering. We've been working with the town now for a very long time on a number of different infrastructure projects in the various hamlets and villages. And as Alan said, in 2016, we worked with the town to do a feasibility study for a sewer system around Duane Lake. With me tonight is Bill Brown. He's our senior engineer who's been working here in the community, is very familiar with all of the issues. Folks may be aware that recently there was a sewer system built here in the hamlet of Duanesburg, and we did that work and coordinated that project. So we have a lot of familiarity with the area. So real quick, our agenda for tonight, there's a lot of information available, but we're going to try to keep it straightforward, is to talk a little bit about current conditions in the watershed. We're going to talk about the evaluation that we did in 2016, and kind of the long and short of that Alan covered is we had a lot of options. They were all very expensive, and we'll talk a little bit about why they were very expensive. Potential grant funding is a new opportunity that came to us this past year. We'll talk a little bit about that, what the source of funding is, what the impacts would be, what it would mean for this project. The project cost and scope, and I'll cover the costs, and then that's where Bill will take over and talk a little bit more about the technical aspects of the project and what's being considered. And then we'll talk about your properties, and what you could expect from a project of this nature. And then we'll end with a discussion about schedule. The one good thing about schedule is these projects take a long time to roll out. They do not sneak up on you. You will know that it's happening if it happens at all. So, current conditions in the lake. Duane Lake is listed on something called the 303D list in New York State. The Clean Water Act, which is a federal law, requires that all of the states classify their water bodies. And they classify them by they're lettered. So A being a drinking water source, B being a source of water that's appropriate for contact recreation, meaning you can go swimming in it, C meaning fish propagation and other uses of that nature. And then there are qualifications for groundwater sources. So that's the classification system. The 303D list is a list of what are called impaired water bodies. So those are water bodies where the classification system has been applied, and for whatever reason, and the list identifies the reason, that water body is not meeting its qualification. So if it's supposed to be for drinking water, the quality in it has degraded to a point where it can't be used for drinking water. If it's supposed to be appropriate for contact recreation, that water quality has degraded to some degree. The 303D list is a publication. You can find it on the DEC's website. It lists the numeric number of the identifier of Duane Lake and of all the other water sources. It says that it's impaired. It states the nature of the impairment, at least to the extent that the state can identify that. And then it can have footnotes that say, well, what should we do about this? Is there something that should be done? In the case of Duane Lake, the DEC cites failing on-site and inadequate on-site septic systems as the root cause, in addition to sedimentation, as Alan said, from just naturally occurring water flowing in, stormwater, those kinds of things. So this part you guys all know really well. Indications of water quality problems. You have algae blooms that are not attractive. You have a lot of weeds growing. Again, we were talking about nitrogen and phosphorus. If you think about it, back in the day when you used to buy fertilizer, that was the #1 ingredient. It makes things grow. So nitrogen and phosphorus occur naturally in the environment, but they also occur in your septic system. And they're encouraging growth. During the day, when the sun is out, algae will grow. It will conduct photosynthesis. You get a lot of oxygen in your water. When the sun goes down at night, that oxygen level dives off really quickly. You get what's called an oxygen sag, and fish have a really hard time living that environment. It's too much up and down. It's not consistent enough. It's a challenge. So it really affects the whole water body. And so that's that rising levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. As you know, your lake is very small. So a lot of the larger lakes have ability to absorb a lot of those nutrients. In a small water body, there's less ability. According to a study that was done, a survey that was done here by the Lake Association, about 60% of the residences around the lake in 2015 were using the lake as a drinking water source. So that's a concern. It's something that needs to be addressed, both in terms of aesthetics as well as water quality. So in 2016, we were working with the town, we worked with the Lake Association. Some of you may have come to a couple of different meetings that we had, and we evaluated options for putting a sewer system of one kind or another around the lake. We looked at the end of the day, we ended up looking at 3 or 4 primary options. They ranged from leaving everyone's septic systems in place and creating a kind of septic maintenance district where more intense work would be done to maintain on-site systems. The problem with that is that the on-site systems are challenged already, and just maintenance alone is probably not going to be enough to solve the problem. We looked at another option where we would leave the septic tanks in place on sites. We would pump the gray water from the septic tanks to a treatment system. That's an option. We looked at an option where the septic tanks on the sites would go away, on every home site would go away. There would be a small pump station, a collection system of pipes around the lake to go off to treatment, either at a treatment plant or a subsurface treatment system here somewhere in the vicinity of the lake. Or the last option was to build a pipeline and send it down the road to the Delanson wastewater treatment plant in the village of Delanson. We looked at all of those different opportunities. At the end of the day, the opportunity that made the most sense was about a $5 million project. And when we did the math, it was just excessively costly to each property owner. And part of the reason is because we don't have a lot of property owners to share in the cost. We have somewhere around, I believe, 86 occupied parcels, 106 parcels altogether, including vacant parcels around the lake. And in New York State, people may not know this, but if you live in a town in New York State, the law is really clear about who pays for things like a sewer system. And those who benefit, meaning those who are connected or who could connect in the future, pay all of the costs. There isn't a way of saying, well, maybe the county should pick up part of the costs, or maybe people out in the larger community should pick up part of the costs. The costs are paid by those properties that are benefited. So that creates a problem. We have a high-cost system and not a lot of people to share the cost. It's pretty simple math, but it's nevertheless a problem. So Alan was running through some of the things that the association has done to look for ways to improve the chances of getting outside financing to support this project. And folks like Ward are to be applauded for a lot of their efforts. One of the things that was done was work to try to change the classification of the lake to make it a drinking water classification for public water supplies, because that would, again, emphasize to funding agencies how important it is to keep this water quality clear and clean. So that was an effort that was very important because it raised awareness at the level of the state about how important Duane Lake is to its residents and what was happening here in terms of environmental quality. Another effort, the state recently, in 2015, it adopted legislation, and again in 2017 renewed that legislation. Part of it, it was called the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, and part of that program was to create a septic replacement program across the state for county soil and water conservation districts to identify areas within their counties where there were large concentrations of failing septic systems that the state could come and provide direct to homeowner assistance to support replacement of septic systems. That program is funneled through the counties. So one of the things that the association did was petition the state to be on that list to see if we could secure that type of financing to help with a project like this. Another effort that was undertaken was something called, was a listing on something called the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, CWSRF, Intended Use Plan, IUP. We're engineers, we really like acronyms. There are a lot of them. We try not to talk about a lot of jargon, but these come to us through the auspices of the federal government. Folks may remember, a lot of people in this room will remember when the Clean Water Act was adopted. And prior to the Clean Water Act, there were some places, most of the larger cities in the very developed east coast of the United States that had some kind of wastewater collection and treatment systems. You know, New York City, Boston, big cities, Schenectady, Albany, Troy. Some of these were historic. They go back many, many years. The Clean Water Act was a game changer because it said not only do you need to get that wastewater from homes and businesses, and just in the past, it just went straight out to the stream, the river, the lake. It was that you now have to intercept that and treat it. And you have to treat it not just to get the big chunks out, but you have to treat it so that the water quality is better, so that we start to improve water quality in our lakes, rivers, and streams. That was wonderful. That was a good thing, right? I think we all agree that clean water everywhere is a good thing. When that first happened, everyone said, yay, but then they said, wait, who's going to pay for all of this? And the question that the original legislation was an unfunded mandate. It was, well, if you fill into certain categories, you're just going to have to do this. You need to figure it out. The states, of course, all went back and said, yeah, that's not going to fly. We can't have our villages and towns and cities funding these costs. They were enormous costs. So the federal government came up with something called the Construction Grants Program. It was operated by the EPA, and it was really the best thing going. Depending on your project and where you were located, you could either get 80% or 90% of the money to build a sewer system paid for as a grant. The community paid either 10 or 20%. This program started in the 1970s and ran up through the mid-1980s. And then that program was done because everyone who was required to build a wastewater treatment plant under the Clean Water Act had done so. So everyone was satisfied and everyone walked away. Except the problem is, by the early 1990s, a lot of these systems were built in the 1970s, were 30 years old, and they needed work. And we go back to, again, now the government saying to the people who own these systems, the villages and the towns and the cities, you need to fix that. And it's millions of dollars. And they're saying, wait a minute, where's the money going to come from? So they came up with something called the State Revolving Fund. And that's this CWSRF. And the State Revolving Fund in New York State and in many states, particularly in the coasts of the country, is what pays for and helps support a lot of municipal infrastructure projects. In fact, the work that's being done here on the Delanson plant, the work that was done in the hamlet of Duanesburg, in Mariahville, is all funded in one way or another, a large part or small part, through this State Revolving Fund program. It's a revolving fund, meaning that the federal government sets aside a certain amount of money every year. The states compete, and I will tell you, New York State, we're a highly regulated, highly taxed state, but boy, are we good at going to the federal government and saying, give us money. We're also really good at spending money. So New York State competes extremely well, gets a giant chunk of that federal appropriation that comes into the state, and then the state says, okay, we're going to create a loan and grant program, and we're going to give this money from the state that came from the feds out to communities to build things for clean water projects. Clean water is a euphemism for sewage, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. So everybody knows. So this clean water system, one of the things that happens when the feds give you money and you're a state, you have to tell them what you plan to do with the money. So there's a thing called an intended use plan. It is literally, what do you plan to do with our money? This little diagram that's behind here is a list. You don't have to see all the details. All you know is there's a lot of stuff on the list. This is page 1 of hundreds. Now the cool thing about it is page 1, it's a priority list because this is competitive. You have to show that you have significant environmental need to compete in this program, and you guys are right here. You're on page 1. That's pretty cool, right? So that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. For you, what this means is it means that you have access to low-cost financing. And if you've ever compared like rates for a mortgage or you were buying a car, you can see the impact that the interest rate that you're using and the term that you're using have on what you pay back, right? So if you can go from a 4% interest rate to a 3% interest rate, and you can go from 20 years to 30 years, you can save a lot of money. You can stretch out those payments, and you're not paying that interest away. So that's what this does for you, and this is a wonderful opportunity, but it's a loan. You have to pay it back. And when we do the math and we look at your system and the 80-something properties, it's still really expensive. So that in and of itself is part of the puzzle, but not the answer. So this past summer, we do a lot of these projects. Our firm, by the way, we're not from Delaware, the state. We're from Delaware, like county. Actually, Bill's from down that way. I'm not. I'm a Finger Lakes girl, and I've lived in the Albany area for about 25 years. But we do a lot of these projects. Water and sewer projects for municipalities is really about 80 to 85% of the work that we do. We're civil engineers. I always say to people, it's very glamorous. It's not, but we get to help a lot of communities. We get to do a lot of good things for people, and that's what we like. Because of that, we know a lot of people, and in the state and in the funding agencies, and because of the work of the association and ward in raising the profile with the state and saying, hey, we've got this water body that needs to have its classification changed. This water body is impaired. This water body, we have failing septics. Raising that awareness and all of these kinds of things led the state to call us and say, we've got a grant program that sounds like it's a great match for Duane Lake. And this grant program is part of something called the Water Quality Improvement Program, WQIP. It's been around for a long, long time. We're in like round 15 or 16, and they skipped a few years, so it's probably been around for about 20 years. WQIP has always been a really good program. A lot of great stuff happens. It's a straight grant program. Does not give you 100% of the money, but on a sliding scale, sometimes it's 40%, 50%, up to 80% of a project. That's good money. In 2017, the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided to put $180 million, I sound like the lottery guy, $180 million, into the Water Quality Improvement Program. The current version of that program has $70 million in it right now for water quality projects across the state. The neat thing is there's a specific carve-out for projects like yours, and it is the non-agricultural, non-point source abatement and control project type, decentralized wastewater treatment facilities for failing on-site septic systems project subtype. Yes, they're bureaucrats, can you tell? They really like their titles. What it does is it funds community subsurface sewer treatment systems and collection systems in situations like yours. It's a grant of up to $3 million. There is a requirement of a 25% local match. So again, none of these grants pay 100%, but they pay a good chunk. And the balance of the costs are eligible for that low-cost loan financing program that we just talked about. So that's a pretty good deal. So what does this mean for us? The DEC, which is the State Department of Environmental Conservation, this is one of their programs. This is kind of their baby. And they're looking for a model project for this program. The other side of this program, aside from places like Duane Lake, actually has to do with Nassau County and Long Island and failing septic systems there. And much of the money over the years for this program has gone to Long Island. None of it has gone upstate. And so there's a desire to find a project that could be a model project to show others the pathway towards using this funding to resolve an environmental concern. And it's kind of neat that the state called the town and said, is this something, do you think that the Duane Lake residents would be interested in? So we said, well, let's find out. Applications for this program are due in July. They are always due in July. It's part of a larger state program called the Consolidated Funding Application process. There's about 28 agencies that give out somewhere around $800 million a year through that program. This is one of them. It's an online application. There's some details that have to be done to get in there. The notices of award for the program are generally done in December. The governor's office makes that decision, and traditionally they have been announced in December. It is a competitive grant program, meaning there will be others who will be saying that they want the state's money to be invested in their community. So we have to be competitive. And how do we do that? We show project readiness and we show community interest by doing that. In the past, when we've looked at grant programs, one of the big hurdles has been, and folks may be familiar with this, that in order for there to be a community sewer system around the community that's going to be going to be owned and operated and maintained by the town, we have to form a taxing jurisdiction, a sewer district. And the rules for forming a sewer district are set out in town law, and they're pretty regimented and pretty straightforward. And one of the things that we have to do in creating that sewer district is we have to say, what's the maximum cost of the project? Well, that's not so hard. I've got this nice engineer over here who can tell us. We have to say, what's the cost to the typical property? Pretty expensive. And we're not allowed to take credit for low-cost financing or grant that we don't have a commitment for. So we have to form the sewer district on the basis of a very expensive project and then say to the residents, no, it's okay, trust us. The price is going to go down. You know, it's sort of, we're from the government, we're here to help kind of thing. So that's a hurdle. It's a challenge. Fortunately, in the past, this program, like I said, has not been used a lot. And when the state called 2 years ago to say why, they asked people like me, because I do a lot of this, and they say, how come you're out there helping people do a lot of this and you never have them use this funding source? I said, because that's the hurdle. How can you legitimately say to a community, you've got to agree to a very, very high, pretty much untenable project cost, and then trust us that it's going to go down? It's just not realistic. No one wants to do that. So one of the things that's really neat is they removed that barrier. And they said, okay, you don't have to form the district to be eligible to apply for the funding. You just have to show that you can form the district within 12 months of award of the grant. So in this case, if the grant was awarded in December of 2020, by December of 2021, an environmental review process would need to be done, the district would need to be formed, a series of other actions would need to be done. But it's nice because it puts you back in the driver's seat to say, okay, we don't have to make any decisions. We just have to say we're willing to try. And if we don't get the grant, then we can say, you know, thanks but no thanks. Doesn't make sense to us. But if we get the grant, then you can say, all right, we on that basis and at that cost, we do want to move forward with this, and it gives you a year to get that accomplished. It's really a pretty nice thing. So what does that mean? Everybody always wants to know. Everybody's sitting here now for 20 minutes saying, how much is this going to cost me? So this is, an estimate. It's a way to start thinking about this. Folks who were here with us, I think it was 2017, summer of 2017, which is getting on to being a while ago, will remember this was a very expensive project. We were talking about cost per household in the $3,500 to $4,000 a year range, which is a lot. State average for sewer across New York State's about $900 a year. So this was a lot of money. What we did here, and I also will tell you guys, this presentation, there are handouts. This is going to be on the website, so you don't have to try to remember what all these things say. You can go look at this later. We estimated the project cost today, because some time has gone by, as being about a $6 million project. If we got a maximum grant from this program, it's $3 million, which would leave us with a $3 million balance to do something with. borrow money to pay back. Using a pretty nice interest rate of 3%, which, y'all hopefully pay attention to financial news. Interest rates are very, very low. We try to be a little conservative. Hopefully it could be less. But 3%, this program allows up to 30 years of borrowing. By the way, there is legislation right now to expand that 30 years to 40 years. We don't know if that legislation is going to actually make it through the state legislature this go around, but it was in the governor's budget. So that would be nice. And the federal program allows up to 40 years of borrowing. At 30 years, the annual debt service would be $175,000. At 106 properties, that's $1,650 a year a property. That's expensive. It's not as ridiculous as we were the last go around when we were looking at this, where we were into the $3,000 or $4,000 range. Operation and maintenance, the type of system, and Bill's going to run through the technical aspects of this, but there is cost associated with just maintaining and running this on an annual basis. We've estimated that cost at about $30,000. That cost would be shared by all the properties that would be connected, so those are the properties that are occupied. There's 86 of those. That's $350 a year a property. So if we do a little bit of math, if you live in a home in Duane Lake and this system was to be built based on the estimate, the annual cost is about $2,000 a year. So that's still a lot of money, and we understand that that's a lot of money. But I also want to mention a couple of things that I think about when I look at these costs, and we do this in communities all over the place. We're very wealthy to extremely, extremely, extremely poor. The ability to live on a lake. I grew up in the Finger Lakes. I grew up in the Finger Lakes on Cayuga Lake. Water quality in my lake is being tremendously impacted by phosphorus from runoff from farms. And you can Google Cayuga Lake and you will see all kinds of studies, and Cornell University is right there, and there's all kinds of efforts to address it. But this past summer, I'm 52 years old. I've lived there all my life. I go every summer. I have 3 brothers who still live there. My mother lives there. And we had more days where we couldn't swim than not because of harmful algae blooms. Cayuga Lake is 4 miles wide and 38 miles long and 600 feet deep in the middle. So to me, I'm saying living on a lake is a privilege. And it's a really, really, I know you guys live there. It's really, really important. That water quality means so much. So I think you have to think about, when you're thinking about cost, you have to think about, as Alan said, if not this, then what? And those kinds of things. $2,000 is probably less than what you pay for internet access and watching television and Netflix and Disney and all of those kinds of things annually. For most homes in upstate New York, that's almost $3,000 is the average. So as we think about kind of $2,000 sounds like a lot of money, and the state average is about $900 overall. But that includes people who live like in Schenectady, where they pay very, very little because their system was built in 1909, and they haven't had to build a lot of things in many, many, many years. So it's a balancing thing. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Bill, who's going to talk about sort of the technical what would be built. And knowing that our options, which were many, have been limited down to essentially one if we want to embrace this funding, because the funding is very specific to the type of technology that can be used. So, you can just hit however you want to move it, or you want me to move it.
That's good. That's a good start. Hi,
Okay.
I'm Bill Brown. Thanks, Mary Beth. We've worked with the town, like I said, for a number of years on the various infrastructure projects. We prepared the engineering report for the Duane Lake system, looking at a few different options. And the funding that's available potentially now kind of limits that to an on-site septic system, subsurface disposal system for treatment of wastewater. So there are a few things that would go into a sanitary sewer system for a community. It starts at each individual home with collection of wastewater that, we all use for flushing toilets and, taking showers and all that kind of stuff. So you start at the source, you collect the wastewater from a given home, and that gets transferred by a series of pipes to a collection main that would likely go around the perimeter of the lake, whether it's along the edge of the road or, through some properties, but generally around the perimeter of the lake, to collect all the wastewater from all the currently 86 parcels. And then ultimately a large subsurface field would be constructed, similar to what you might have on your home parcel, but obviously on a bigger scale, to compensate for the increased wastewater flow. With the general geography of the lake, many of the houses are lower in elevation. They're closer to the lake. That's where the wastewater is compared to where the road is. So we would expect that the bulk of the properties would need to have small pump stations installed. And if any of you were around when we were doing the project here in Duanesburg, there are about 25 pump stations that were installed as part of this system. Generally, they're a pretty small impact on a property, and we'll show you some pictures of some installations. But the pump station would go generally on most properties. And as we get into design, there may be some areas where that can change a little bit, and some areas maybe not require a pump station, be able to just gravity flow out of your house. But the way we estimated the project was to assume everybody would need a pump station on their property that would collect the wastewater that comes out of your house now, goes to the collection main, and then ultimately gets sent to the subsurface field for treatment. So this is what we looked at for a general service area, and nothing's locked in stone with this, but it was basically to highlight the parcels that have frontage along Duane Lake Road, both the houses along the lake itself and one row out. So that's the pink area there. There's a map over here on the side that folks want to look at. It shows where the tax parcels are, and might be able to get a sense of where your house might be if you're interested in looking at that. So that's kind of the main parts and pieces of the sanitary sewer system. We talked about the pump stations. Generally, they are a small tube or a tank. There's a piece of pipe over here that is similar to what the pump stations that we've used in the past are. Wastewater from your home drains to the pump station, the tank, that's a few feet outside your house. There's a pump in there that pumps it, up the hill to a main. The pump station is installed by the contractor that's installing all the mainline pipe, and it's connected to your house line. And then also the power for that pump station is generally connected to the individual property owner's power panel. So you will have some electricity costs associated with this. Generally, they're 1 horsepower pumps. They're not, big systems that are going to triple your electric bill. They're pretty small and compact for a normal, residential use. So what we typically do is set the pump station, install a stub out of it on the homeowner side for the homeowner to disconnect their existing septic system that they would have on their property, and reconnect the pipe coming out of the house from that into the pump station, and then from the pump station that would be installed by the general contractor typically. And it can vary from project to project, but that's how we set it up in the past couple of projects with the town. So there could be ranging costs for property owners to make that initial connection, but once that's done, there really shouldn't be any other costs other than your annual O&M costs associated with it. But these are a couple of pictures of pump stations being installed for some of your neighbors here in Duanesburg. They're about 8 foot tall. They go in the ground. They're about 30 inches in diameter. You can't drive your lawnmower over them, but they're pretty harmless. This is one that's been installed, and you can that is the top of one of the pump stations back behind the house. That is the control panel that is then tied into the house breaker, and this is where the grass is just starting to grow up. One of the other components to the pump station that goes along with it is providing access to that component for long-term maintenance. In the other districts that have been formed by the town, the pump station and their maintenance has been the responsibility of the town district. in order for the town to come on your property, an easement needs to be established, one to set the pump station, and then if there's any damage to it, or something gets clogged, or a pump breaks, or a wire breaks, or whatever it may be, the town, if a district is formed, could enter the property through that easement to do the maintenance on that piece of equipment. So this is an easement map that was established, and it would get filed with the county clerk's office if a pump station goes on a given property, just to provide access for installation and maintenance. Which one was it? N. Try that one. N for next. So that really dealt with what the impact to your given property would be as a homeowner. Once all that wastewater is collected, from the 86 houses, we estimated in the range of 10,000 gallons of wastewater would be collected. That would then be pumped and piped to a large subsurface field. So there's a couple of different ways to set those up, and a lot of it depends on the existing property where it's going to be sited. In Duanesburg, there's a lot of clay, which isn't very conducive to putting in septic systems. What we generally do in these types of situations, and it would need to be confirmed based on where the specific one is sited here, initially do some soil testing, but likely have to bring in sand into a raised system, and then put in, more or less a traditional leach field, just on a bigger scale. At the end of that, and the sizing we looked at, again, on that 10,000 gallon a day range, worked out to roughly 10 acres of space. So it is a pretty sizable amount of area that would ultimately need to be acquired for siting of a subsurface field. That's really the largest impact is acquiring that space versus some of the other options, which were building a treatment plant, which would be buildings and a more condensed site, and or pumping to another system. Both of those options, have a smaller footprint, but one is putting, buildings up, and the other is pumping, miles and miles of piping. And also the funding that we're looking at with this track limits to just the subsurface element. So this is just some different things that we look at from a soil characteristic. Clays, they don't drain well, as probably most of you folks know better than us, and sand does better, so we would anticipate probably needing to bring in sand to build that system. We have done a few of these in other areas, obviously on bigger scales than just a typical homeowner. A lot of people think of a septic system and the bad things associated with that come to mind. They stink, they're wet, they don't work well, and there's history of that in the area. And a lot of that has been, we think, fixed with the installation of sanitary sewer systems. A properly working septic system, it looks like a field. You generally, you don't know what's there. You can mow it, you can walk across it. It's not, it's not muddy, it's not stinky. None of those things. What we've done is a couple of pictures here of another system that was installed for a summer camp in Delaware County. It was funded by New York City DEP because the camp was in the New York City watershed. They generate about 8,000 gallons a day of wastewater, and before they more or less went to the stream, which then drained to the New York City reservoir, which was not good in their minds. So they funded an upgrade to the camp's sanitary system. So maintenance was a big thing for the summer camp, not wanting to have a treatment plant that you would have to have a full-time operator for. So they had the space available to do an on-site system. So the picture on the left is just as we were starting to install it. That's one of the access roads, but the green grass is, as it had been for decades and decades. And then on the right is after the installation. So there it was a similar situation where they did have a lot of clay and poorly draining soils, where we had to bring in a fair amount of sand and bring the ground elevation up, and then put the fields in, and then grass across the top. You'll see it, the one trench there is a stone trench, diversion swale, so any rainwater is diverted away from the septic field. But at the end of the day, it's basically a field that has some buried tanks and stuff like that in, but it's not a big eyesore, and it doesn't have the typical or things that folks might associate with a septic system, a failing septic system. A properly designed and operating, leach field doesn't have those characteristics. This is another, and a little tough to see, but another kind of visual to that end. There's a company that does aerial photographs going back decades, EDR. So we looked at the aerial of Camp Newbar it goes back to the 50s, but one that was from 1993, and the red line is their tax parcel. They've got a small pond too that they fish and swim and such, and then all the camp cabins are kind of on the upper right side of the lake. So in 2006, there was a septic system, on-site septic system installed, and this is where the picture from the slide before was taken. So this was the before, and just happens to be 2013, but 6 or 7 years after the system's been in and operating. It's a field. It gets mowed. You can't put buildings on it, but it's not a big eyesore like some other bigger buildings and treatment facilities and stuff might be.
Is it hayable?
Typically, no. Just cutting the grass, brush hog it or mow it. Typically, they don't put heavy equipment on them. The next, that's kind of a lot of the parts and pieces associated with the technical side of it and what the hardened infrastructure is. It really is similar to what you might have on your property, just on a bigger scale. Mary Beth's going to talk about some of the schedule and some of the action items if the association and the folks here in the room want to move forward with the project. So,
Great.
thanks.
Great. So this is it. We've been talking for a long time. This is the last slide, and then we'll do questions. So we've kind of covered why are we talking about this, quality of water in the lake, quality of life. We've talked about what are the impediments that we have. Not a lot of properties, very expensive project. We've talked about opportunities to try to find financing for the project to try to reduce the cost. We've talked about one particular opportunity that's coming to us that appears to be a very good opportunity, but it does limit the type of technology that we can use. So we've talked about that type of technology and what that would look like. So you see both the impact to your properties as well as what the treatment system would look like, which, as Bill says, is a field. Right before we started this, I handed Bill another version of it was a similar project to Camp Newbar called Camp Harriman, which was also funded by New York City's watershed, and that is almost exactly the same size as what you would be looking at here. That project is on something called Lake Capra in the town of Hunter. We installed that one around the same time as Camp Newbar. It is still functioning. It's a field. They mow it. It looks like a field. No impacts. In fact, most of the people there didn't know it had happened because we constructed it after they left in the fall, and it was grown in pretty well in the spring when they got there, and they said, I thought we were getting a sewer project. And we said, you did. You just didn't know about it. So last slide, what's the sequence of events? I said in the beginning, these projects don't sneak up on you. They take a long time. This timeline shows you they take a long time. Here we are today, our community information session. Good news, we've given you a lot of things to think about. Good news, you have some time to think about it. We don't need to do anything immediately. No one needs to make any decisions. But we do need to be working towards our kind of next trigger, which would be if we want to try to secure this grant financing, those grant applications are due in July. And there are a number of steps that should be taken by the community to, again, show that project readiness and show that there is community interest. Some of those steps might be conducting a public hearing, which is part of the one baby step in the process of creating a sewer district. No commitments, no one's going to say that's what's going to happen, but it's a step. beginning to conduct the environmental review process. People may be aware in New York State we have legislation that requires that whenever someone's going to do something that requires a permit from the state or a federal agency, we have to conduct an environmental review to evaluate what's being done and what are the potential impacts to the environment, and if there are any that are negative, what can be done to reduce or eliminate those. So we can work on that process. That process also includes things like coordinating with the State Historic Preservation Office to evaluate impacts to cultural and natural resources, those kinds of things. All of those are actions that can be conducted without making a commitment to the project. They're just steps along the way. We would suggest that if the grant is something that the community would like the town to pursue, that those steps occur over the spring, so that when we get to summertime, we have a very solid competitive application for this program to go in July. The grant program doesn't actually get announced until May, but they've been doing this for 8 years, and it's always pretty much the same time frame, so those are the dates that we're using. The funding application would go in July. Typically, if the last 8 years are any indication of the future, awards are announced in December. And from there, you know, if we get an award, we can all pat ourselves on the back, and now we still have we're at another crossroads. Do we still want to pursue this project? Even if you got an award of a grant, you could say, you know, I'm not comfortable with this project, and you can say thanks but no thanks. If you want to pursue that grant funding, though, the way that it's been written is there's a year that goes by that the community has to, again, meet more criteria, including forming that sewer district and doing some other activities. So that would be happening in 2021. We're already a year from where we stand today. So this is why I say these projects take a long time. And really what we've done is a lot of paperwork. We haven't really done a lot else. We've done a lot of paperwork. Once we've gotten that process finished, and through that process, again, you're sort of at another crossroads. Do we really want to do this? Is this something we really want to pursue? Now you're at the point where the rubber hits the road and you have to say yes or no. Folks are going to be saying, we're not going to make a commitment of financing resources to you if you're not going to commit that you're going to use the money. The reason is because the list of people who want this money is very, very, very long. And the state needs to, as I said before, the state of New York is really good at spending money. That's a good thing, because then they can go back to the federal government and say, remember the money you gave us? We need more. Give us more. We spent it. So they don't like to wait around for people to make decisions. They have calendars that we have to follow. So we would be doing that. We would need to do all of the, Bill kind of ran through all of the logistics of this project, securing easements on all of the properties. That's a very intense process, because you as property owners are going to say, well, my septic system's located over here, and I don't want to redo all my plumbing, so I want my connection to be over here. And we customize that in every single site. So there's some effort there. Figuring out, where does the sewer main go? Does it go in the shoulder of the road? Does it go, because again, as we make these decisions, there's an engineering aspect of it, but there's a bigger part of it, which is the cost. And there are a lot of things that we can do to be creative to try and reduce the cost. Every foot of pipe we put in, somebody has to pay for. So we're always trying to say, how can we reduce those costs? So that design process is complex and time consuming, and that's what would occur in 2022. And then because this project, because of its expense and because it's a public works project, it has to go out to bid. So there's a bidding process. We've had a lot of really good success here in the town. You have a lot of really great local contractors, and a project of this scale is the type of project that attracts local contractors to it, and you have a lot of really good, solid local people who do this work. So that's terrific. But bidding is a 3 or 4 month process, and then construction. So we would be looking at potentially, if this timeline follows forward, having a system online in 2023. So it's 2020 today. We just started this delightful new year and decade, and we're talking about 2023. So as I said, it takes some time, but it's something for you to think about. Again, back to the idea of to me, your property is probably one of the most valuable things you have, and protecting it and protecting the lake is really, really important. And if this is in a direction that you want to go, then there are other things I know that the association has been thinking about in terms of ways to try to protect and improve water quality. This is just one of them. So with that, we'd love to turn this over for questions for folks. And I do want to just remind everybody there are microphones. You need a microphone when you speak so that people out in the world can hear you and can hear your question.
Is this one ready? Yes, it's hot. Okay. Chris, you've got a microphone. I'm going to give this one to Pat so she can walk around and hand it to people when they ask questions.
What's the downside for moving forward with trying to get the grant? Seeing we can, at some step down the road, say, we can't do it.
So from our perspective, there isn't a downside. You're sort of opening doors. Now, the one thing that I will say, and since we have the town supervisor and Councilman Ganther here, you know, we're professionals. We're like your doctor or your lawyer or your mechanic. We're paid. We're here tonight. We're not being paid to be here tonight because this is an important part in this process that we need to help you all think about. But as we go down the road, we were talking about all these different steps. There's a cost associated with those. In the initial phases of work, the town has agreed to support those costs, which is good. So if there's a downside, it's that the town is supporting those costs. If at some point along the way the project doesn't advance, then the town has spent some money on something that's not going to happen, which is a risk. There's no way to get around that, unfortunately. But from my perspective, by approaching this grant, you were asked by the state, who is the people who give out the money, if you want to participate. That's a pretty good indication that they might want to give you the money, provided you can kind of follow through with their rules. One of the things that we'll need to do, and Bill had that nice slide that showed you the different kinds of soils and things, evaluating property for the location of the subsurface treatment system is a really important step somewhere along the way to make sure that this is a viable project, that we can actually find land that is reasonably proximate, so we're not building miles and miles of pipe, and that is available and that meets the environmental criteria to site that large system on it. That's a really, really critical part of this. You guys may say, hey, we really, really want to do this, but at the end of the day, if we are challenged to find a site to fit it, that could be a sticking point for us. So I think there isn't a downside. I think you're opening a door and you're moving forward. And in the early stages, at least to get the application in July, we're not talking about spending a lot of time and effort. We're talking more about things that you guys will do that I know Alan's going to talk about in terms of showing community commitment. Something that you may, you're not agreeing to do anything, but you're saying we're interested. And if this comes to pass and it makes sense to us, we would embrace the program.
You said at the initial stages that the town is going to be funding the initial part of this. At what point would we have to start funding, other parts of it?
That's a great question. We kind of ran through this timeline. I'm glad we still have it up here. These initial stages are very, very, efficient for us to do because of all the work we've done in the past. The town, Bill has a copy someplace of our engineering report. The town funded that engineering report. We need to update it. We need to make some modifications to it. It's from 2016, but we already have a lot of the baseline data, so we're not reinventing the wheel. We're going to use that information. One of the things that we talked about earlier was that access to low-cost financing through the state's revolving fund, the SRF, the CW SRF program. One of the coolest things about that program is not only does it give you money to build something, but it gives you money to pay for all of us nice engineers and the lawyers and all the other things that have to happen up front. So if you've ever known someone or yourself bought a piece of property and then gone to a bank and said, hey, eventually someday I want a mortgage, but right now I just want to build my house and I need you to give me money so I can build the house that eventually becomes the collateral for my mortgage that I then pay you back for over a long period of time. This program is exactly the same. It provides a bridge loan early on in the process to fund the cost of engineering, of design, of land acquisition, of bidding, and of construction. And that money is provided, and particularly the way that this is structured right now, is provided at very, very low cost, 50% say it's a $6 million project, $3 million of it would be available at 0% interest for the 5 years, for about a 5-year period. That's a pretty good deal. I bet we all wish we could get that. The other 50% is at very, very low interest. Right now, that very, very low interest is sub 1% interest. It's a really good deal. The town accesses that money like a line of credit. So when an invoice comes in, yep, I'm getting to the part where you pay. The interest rate for the other 50% is less than 1%. It's 0.78% right now. Pretty good deal. It's a really good deal. So the town accesses that money like a line of credit. So when they get an invoice and they need money to pay for something, they go ask the state for that money. It gets transferred to the town pays the bill. The value there is that you're not accumulating interest on a giant amount of money. You're accumulating interest on a little bit of money as you go along, which is a good benefit to you. Eventually, after the project is all built and everything is all done and everyone is all happy, then that bridge loan gets turned into long-term financing, gets rolled into that kind of mortgage phase of the project, which gets paid out over 30 years or whatever the term is. That's when everybody has to start paying the bill. So what's really nice about the program, again, is that the upfront stuff gets paid for through this line of credit. So the town's not paying for stuff out of pocket. You're not paying for stuff out of pocket. It gets rolled into that long-term financing. So we're looking at, if we're in construction in 2023, we're probably looking at the first bill for this coming in 2024. So folks, again, when we talk about that $2,000 cost, Bill also had a slide up there that said that the cost to kind of do the plumbing and the decommissioning, it ranges between $1,000 and $3,000. That was the cost out here in Duanesburg, so it's the neighbors. So it's not an unreasonable thing to assume. You have a long time to plan for that cost. It's not something that would happen tomorrow because that is an out-of-pocket cost one time through the plumbing and the decommissioning of your existing system, but you have that time, and again, we're talking about construction in 2023. So does that answer your question?
I'd like to know, does the town or the Duanesburg have any available property they know now that we can utilize for this area? You know, for this 10 acres or whatever it is? Because I don't have 10 acres. There's
Right.
only a few people that does have some space for this. And my question, and then the question here is, you know, the piping and everything else in that regards. So where would you locate it if you can do it?
So what we've done so far, and know that we've been very preliminary in this, because again, you know, there's a balance between doing enough work to be able to frame something out for you and give you reasonable comfort that we're talking about something reasonable, that's realistic, versus spending a lot of time, energy, and effort on something that might never happen. So we've done a balance. What we've done is we've looked at the geography in the vicinity of the lake. We've looked at it from a geologic perspective. What are the soil types? And we use publicly available data to do that. We've looked at, these white lines represent property boundaries. We've looked at properties. We've looked at, knowing that we're probably in that 10 acre, could be 6 to 7 to 8, depending on soil types, but we're probably in that 10 acre size. We've looked at, is there geography in this area that could support it? We haven't, you know, looked at anybody's specific property per se. We've looked at locations and said, is this even realistic? Are there places in this area where this could work? So we've done that. We did look to see if there were any public lands in this area owned by the county, the town, the state, someone. The answer is no. It's all private property in this general geography. Because one of the things we have to think about as we're looking at the location for this, in addition to 10 acres and amenable soils and all this stuff, is the further away it is, the more pipe we have to install, the more cost it is. So we're back to that balancing. And the cost is paid for by the district. So we're back to that balancing. So given our initial review, we've seen locations that could potentially support a subsurface system. We need to do, as Bill's slide said, more evaluation. And obviously, we haven't talked to any property owners directly. That process would need to play out as well. People will have concerns, and we totally understand that. That is completely legitimate. And property owners will be saying, well, what's the value of my property if a portion of it becomes this system? Those are things that all have to be discussed. In terms of the network of pipes that would collect the water, generally the way that that works is that ends up in a right-of-way or an easement, because again, it's going to end up being public infrastructure. This is going to get paid for by public dollars. So there has to be a way for the people who are operating and maintaining the system, the town's employees, to have access, you know, to fix things and maintain things and such. Usually the way that those easements, Bill had a copy of an easement up here, work is for most people, because those easements are for the benefit of their property, you're not getting any money in exchange for that easement. It's for the benefit of your property, it's your plumbing. A lot of times we try and keep these systems in roads because it's road and everyone's sharing the road and everyone's sharing that value. But again, we haven't gotten to those nitty-gritty details yet of exactly where would pipes go, those kinds of things. Does that answer your question?
That answers maybe where the land, where the land might be.
Oh.
But my question is where the land, the potential land might be, because of the Duanesburg and the politicians here and whatnot. But, I only can see one thing on North Mansion Road over there, that's a nice big field and whatnot. But that's all downhill, that's all be going down. That'd be great, but I think then you gotta have the pumping stations. I was just wondering, did you identify where the pumping stations would be on this preliminary map right here?
So what we've assumed, and Bill kind of covered this, is, and it's hard to see, but you guys know your properties. Most of the homes, this is a lake community, most of the homes are close to the lake. The road is away from the lake. I don't know where everybody's septic systems are, but I'll guarantee you it's downhill somewhere from your house, because that's how the water gets there by gravity, unless you have a pump station, which you might. But the idea here is that we're going to need water either goes by gravity through a pipe or we force it by putting in a pump station. There's a couple different ways that can be done. A pump station could go, a little pump station could go on everybody's property that will create the force that will send the wastewater to wherever it needs to go, even if it's uphill, will send the water there, or those little pump stations can pump to another location where there can be a larger pump station that can again create that pressure to push that water where it needs to go. That again is a detail one of the parts of this as we get into design, this is a little ways from now, would be to do a land survey of the entire area, understand the topography. We need to know if this house is 5 feet above that house, all of those kinds of things. Excuse me, one of the things that you saw on this was you saw that this is an easement here. This property, the reason that this particular property has a pump station is because it's lower than the sewer main. So there's no way to get the water from that property, from that home to the sewer main without creating force, without getting it there. That's the reason it has a pump station. There are other properties in the area that are collected by gravity because they're higher than the sewer main. So we would do all of that detail. One of the things you see on this map is you see on the box, this is the house. You see FFE 874.85. I don't know if you can see it from that distance, but FFE is finished floor elevation. So a survey was done to figure out what is the height of this house relative to the pipe. So all of those details would have to be evaluated to understand how many people need pumps, what kinds of pumps, where are they located, all of those kinds of things. I will tell you in lake communities, we've done a lot of them. It is very traditional that folks will have pump stations in their homes because their homes are closer to the lake and the lake is the lowest thing in the area. It's a very common occurrence.
I apologize if this information was given. It's an engineering question. Is this for collection of wastewater only or includes solids? And if so, how are solids going to be dealt with?
Generally solids. It can go other way once the design is advanced. The preliminary estimates that we put together, the pumps that we showed, were to pump solids. So the stations are grinder pumps, so they chop up any solids that are in it, and then it gets pumped down the line.
Well, then are those gathered prior to the distribution field?
Yes.
Solids?
Yeah, so
there-
it's
there's
all
another
mixed
septic.
together. It's
Yeah.
literally
I get how that works, yeah.
the wastewater comes through your house plumbing. So you took a shower, you flushed your toilet, you did whatever. It all is going to go to a common pipe. That's going to go to our little tank here. Inside this tank is a pump, and the pump is designed to chop it all up and basically liquefy it. So it turns all those solids into essentially a thick liquid that will go through a pipe that's got actually a really super small diameter that's going to go, and then on the treatment plant site, and you should jump in any second, there will be septic tanks on that site,
We'll have like a 10,000
like a
gallon
giant septic tank
That's-
that will address that aspect of it.
That's the different ways to set it up, is whether you have individual septic tanks on the site, so, and then the gray water from that would go to a pump station, then you've got 86 septic tanks to maintain. Or you pump everything to a central septic tank that's a larger, but you get some economy of scale when you have to pump one big tank out once a year versus having to pump out,
Right.
80-some tanks.
Thank you, understood. Second question, not at all related. Is the power of eminent domain conceivably used to acquire the 6 to 10 acres? Is that an option that's on the table?
So if this is a public system, the town, as a town, under New York state law, has the ability to conduct eminent domain. No, obviously, no one's there at this point, and no one's discussed that at this
Understood.
point. And for folks who, eminent domain is a proceeding where a public purpose is established, and that means that a public body can come to a private property owner and say, for your property, there is a public purpose. And the way just so everybody knows, the way all eminent domain proceedings start is by engagement in a willing buyer, willing seller negotiation. Hopefully, it's not required that it goes through an eminent domain proceeding, but an eminent domain proceeding is also called a taking, meaning that the public body is saying your private property is needed for a public good or a public benefit, and if we can't come to an agreement, willing buyer, willing seller, you still get paid. It's just that there's a court saying the property, you've established a public purpose, and the property can go to that public purpose, and then it's just a matter of figuring out how much that property gets paid. We do a ton of these projects, literally hundreds of them. We hardly ever get engaged in eminent domain proceedings. It is very, very, very rare, just extremely rare. Because again, usually the person's being benefited by the project. That's the whole reason the project is happening. So generally speaking, we don't see that. I don't know that we would think that we would see that in this case, but just so everybody knows, that is what the gentleman is asking about. But people can't hear you out in the TV land.
I've got about 350 feet from the house to the road. Do you have any idea what the price per foot is that the contractors were charging in Duanesburg to reach from the house to the hookup?
Generally, for the pump, that 350 feet would be paid as part of the project. The pump stations generally go relatively close to the house because you want to get from the house to the pump station by gravity. So that pump station and then the pipe from the pump station up to the road, the way we did it in past projects, that cost was paid under the project. What the cost to the homeowner is to go from your house, the pipe coming out of that goes to your septic tank now, intercept that pipe and take it to the pump station. So generally that's a pretty short run. And then you would also have to decommission your existing septic tank, have it pumped, fill it with sand so it couldn't be used, in the future.
So in this image, you see, do you have the pointer?
Yep.
So you see the distance, if I can get it to go. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so you can see I'm having a problem. That's the edge of the house, That's the distance that the homeowner had to pay, was to that little green blob there. Meanwhile, over here on this one, the project paid this cost all the way out. So the homeowner paid a very small cost, basically what we call kind of plumbing, because you're connecting your building plumbing to this little green guy, this little tank, and then the project is picking up this distance. So what happens is we're going to have houses that are at all different distances from the main. Some of them are going to be 50 feet, and some of them are going to be 300 feet. But that cost is shared among everybody. So it's sort of an equalizing factor. And the idea is, again, as Bill said, you want this to be gravity. So it's really custom on every single site, because every house is different. You guys don't have anything cookie cutter at all in your community. Every house is different on every site. I'm sure every septic system leaves the basement in a different location. I'm sure they're all at different elevations. That's one of the reasons why it will take probably about a year to design this thing, because it'll literally be custom on 86 sites, how to make those connections. And again, what we're trying to do when we design this is we're trying to, obviously we want to keep the direct cost to the homeowner as low as possible, but we also want to make sure that this cost is as low as possible too, because everyone's sharing that cost. And that's where we've had lake communities, and I don't know that this is the case with yours, because you kind of have this perfect little ring around your lake, but we've had lake communities. We did a project up in Saratoga County on a lake where on the west side of the lake, all the parcels were long and skinny, and the road was really, really far away. So we could have kept the sewer main on the road, but then everybody who lived in one of those parcels, and in that case, the property owners were paying all of those costs. They would have had to pay to go thousands of feet to get to the main. So instead there was about 50 of them, and we went to them and said, if you guys can all get together and agree to an easement running through your properties, basically in land you're not using anyway, we'll put the line real close to your houses, and then your cost goes down. But you have to agree to an easement to put that sewer main on your property. And they did, because they did not want to pay all of those costs. So the easement was worth it to them to say, okay, get the line closer to my house so I don't have to pay all those costs. Those are all details that come out as we do the design and work with you in great detail.
There would be a point where we'd be, if it goes forward, generally that would be knocking on everybody's door, sending everybody a letter to come out and find out, where's the line leave your basement, where could we put a pump station, where can't we put a pump station, where's your well, where, things like that, to have that information, when we go into design, so that we get pricing from it from the contractors.
Yeah, everyone will get a little picture that looks like this, and you'll be asked to take out a magic marker and draw on it and show us where your septic system is, where does the pipe come out of your basement, where's your well, where's your dog that you buried 2 or 3 years ago that you don't want us to dig up, where are grandma's rhododendrons. We deal with all of that stuff, or we try our best to deal with all of those kinds of things. Believe it or not, all of that stuff happens and then some. We also work, you guys are a relatively young community, but we work in a lot of really historic old communities, and we'll have a contractor out there digging in, and they'll dig into a brick thing, and they'll go, oh, everybody stop, and it's an old cistern that nobody knew was there, those kinds of things. You shouldn't have that on this project, but it does make the projects very interesting.
I have a couple of questions. Our road and our geography is sort of weird in that we have a number of properties that are very close to the lake, but are actually not in the watershed. So in those situations, are those properties considered to be exempt from the project because their effluent is draining away anyway? And second, is my memory correct? I think I read in state law that if you have a fairly new backyard septic system that's maybe 2 years old or 5 years old, that you have a certain number of years where you can continue to use that until it's considered economically kaput. By my count, there's probably there are at least 10 fairly new septic systems I can count in the last 10 years. So I wonder how those folks would fare.
Right. So in terms of the watershed question, you guys have the driver of your system is because of your watershed, is because of your lake. So you may make that determination, to be determined, that folks who are not draining into the lake are not part of the project. Because you could also say they should be part of the project because having access to public sewers is a benefit. It is an improvement to a property. You can sell your house for more money if you're on a public sewer. So, to be determined. There is no right or wrong way to look at that. We do a lot of these projects. Actually, your project is these lake projects are kind of unique in that they usually are watershed driven. So we look at what's the watershed and who are the people who are the most impacted. But in a lot of our communities, it's not a watershed project. We've done a lot of expansions on, the hamlet right here. That wasn't a watershed driven project. That was just we had a lot of failing septic systems and a lot of really small lots where they couldn't be rebuilt. So that wasn't about where's the water going. That was about we need to eliminate failing septic systems regardless of what watershed they're in. A lot of projects are driven that way. So that's sort of a to be determined. In terms of I have a new septic system, do I have to connect? Here's a couple thoughts on that. One thing is that the town of Duanesburg has a sewer use law. I encourage you all to look at it, especially if you can't sleep. It's good reading material. That sewer use law is based on a model law that's created by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. The town adopted the model law and made some modifications that customize it for your community, because that model law includes things like, we have a hazardous waste dump, or we have an industrial user, or this or that. You don't have those things in your community. Good for you. So it is custom for your community. If this sewer district were to be created, it would fall under the town's sewer use law. The town's sewer use law governs things like who connects and who does not connect, and how are people paying. What is the method of payment? So it would fall under the town's sewer use law. I believe the way we have this set up, we do a lot of these, so Roger, John, if I'm not on the right track, I believe the way we have it set up is if you have an engineered system that was approved by the Schenectady County Department of Health, and so that means it was installed and inspected and those kinds of things. I believe we have a waiver process where you can say, hey, I have a perfectly good system. I spent a lot of money on it. I'm not going to connect because my system is kind of not part of the problem. That said, so that's one part of it. There is a trigger in there for how do we know in the future that when your system fails we need you to connect. So there's some things that address that. And then the other part of this, and this is the sticky part that people usually get a little, kind of interested in, is the way that people are charged. So if we go back to, I think we got to go back a couple here. Here we are. So one of the reasons when we did all this math that we ended up with lots of green boxes is because the costs come from different places. One of the places the cost comes from is the debt service. The debt service is the cost to build the thing, put the infrastructure in the ground. So that's the debt cost. Then we separately calculated what's the cost to operate and maintain the system. The gentleman was asking about like septic tanks and those kinds of things. Well, there's a cost to maintaining that, the pipes and the pumps and pumping out tanks and those kinds of things. That's that $30,000 O&M cost. New York state law is really clear on this. When a property is improved by a public improvement, the property owner pays that cost because your property is improved, whether you connect or not. You have access to a public facility, so you pay for that. So that's why we have 106 parcels paying the debt service, because all the parcels, whether there's a property on it or not, whether they connect or not, are benefited by the improvement. You have access to public sewer whether you connect or not. Only those that connect pay the operation and maintenance costs, because in New York State, under New York State contract law, you can't be charged for some service you're not getting. So that's why we have 86 properties there. Those are the 86 occupied parcels. We assumed everyone would connect. Maybe there's some folks who have engineered systems who wouldn't. That number would go down from 86 to whatever number is appropriate. But that's kind of the long and the short of that answer. So some folks, there's a possibility, who have engineered systems may say, okay, well, I'm in the district, I'm benefited, I'm going to pay this $1,650 or whatever that number is, but I'm not connecting right away. I'm going to amortize the cost I put into my engineered system, and I'll connect in 5 years or whatever.
Okay, so one last question, that is, if we should happen to run out of time this evening and people have additional questions that they think of tonight, well, at midnight or something, or in the next few days, can they email them in to us and then
Absolutely.
forward them to you, and then we can post them all on the website?
Absolutely, 100%. And really, we understand that there's a lot of folks who are out of town and things. We expect this process to be ongoing over the next couple of months for sure. So we're available to answer questions. That's a great way of doing it.
I have another question. You got all these pipes going up and down. You got different elevations. We have backflow valves on all these sub pumps.
Yeah, every individual pump station, generally we put 2 on, and then a lot of homeowners choose to put another third one on the line coming out of their house. But the pump station has one on the line coming off the pump, and then there's a valve out in the yard, and it's a double valve that allows turn on and turn off, and it also has a check valve inside it. So if you're pumping against the system pressure can't come back into your pump station, or
Well, I don't want it back on my property. I'm like a rivet
Exactly.
But that's
Exactly.
there's a couple of checks for that.
on that. Now, the thing is, we got these grinders, whatever you want to call them. You said how tall are these? Well, how-
6 to 8 feet, and it depends on the topography of your property. Some of them end up being a little deeper,
So
but it's
how on that, I can't get down there. I got this, shale on there, or you got to jackhammer that out.
that's what they make a jackhammer for. We had a few instances of that,
Well, I just
but
wanna
it's a
make-
small. I mean, it's a small excavation. It's a 3-foot diameter tank, and generally we'll put a concrete ballast in the bottom of it. So if the tank's empty and there's groundwater, it can't float up out. So it's a relatively small excavation.
And the other
even
question
if you
here
do
is,
need a hammer.
on those grinder pumps there, do they ever freeze? Because I don't use, I have a camp, so the thing is, do they freeze, will that be a problem maintaining?
The pump itself is down at the bottom of that pit, so it's down 5 or 6 feet. So generally, and the pipes are all the pressurized pipes we put down, 5 feet generally, so we try to keep them below the frost line.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have to winterize or any of those, the pumps or anything else like that.
No, as a
No.
private, homeowner, no.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
Yeah.
would drain your house out, and it would pump the wastewater into the line.
yeah, I don't want any headaches,
Right.
Yeah,
you
no.
know, on that. Okay.
Like I say, these are very typical in lake communities, and if you think about it, most lake communities have part-time residents who are not there in the wintertime. So this is a pretty typical installation. And again, it's below the ground, so it's essentially insulated below the frost level.
What size line do you have coming into the tank from the house?
Hang on a second. Ask your question again.
What size line do you have coming from the house to the tank?
Generally, it's the same size. It's a 4-inch line that you would have coming out currently. We intercept the pipe that you have there now, put a couple fittings on, or, the homeowner would put a couple fittings on it and come to the pump station. So it's generally a 4-inch gravity, PVC line. And then it's generally 1.5 inches, give or take, line from the pump station up to a main at the road, or wherever the main ends up being.
It's, I have a question more. I have a new system, a new tank, and I'm wondering if I use gravity, which I'm using now to feed the septic tank, and you put your tank on the outside where I would run into the leach field, do I have to eliminate my tank?
In theory, I guess you could keep it, but there wouldn't be a benefit really to you, because the pump station is made to take the solids away. If you left the tank there, then it'd be something else for you to maintain and, generally pump out every year or two. Generally, when we put the new pump stations in, they're taking all the wastewater, unless system-wide we do it on a gray water basis, but generally it's taking all the wastewater, including the solids that are right now going to your tank. But it becomes less of if that tank's not there, it's less of an O&M thing for you to worry about.
Right.
And also with the pump stations, that control panel, if something fails in that, there's an alarm on it, and the town sewer department is fortunate enough to get to maintain those, and that's why easements are in place for the other systems.
My question is, you described this system as like an enlarged, like homeowner type system. The homeowner systems typically age out. That's why we're having this problem, right? So what sort of longevity do we have on a system like this?
We generally design wastewater systems for a minimum of 30-year lifespans. On subsurface fields, the state typically requires additional redundancy. So whether that's a larger field than you might need and you rotate the wastewater use around it, and or additional area to provide for more fields to be built or have those fields replaced in 20 or 30 or 40 years should they be needed. But that's part of the state design regulations,
Right.
that that specific thing be taken into account.
Right. In a lot of cases, it's very, very common that these larger systems will have, like the one that I was thinking of that's almost exactly the same size as this, has 3 separate beds that are separated from each other. They range from, I think it was about 12,000 square feet to about 20,000 square feet. So these things are huge. And that system was designed to rely on 1.5 beds annually, so that you would use a bed and a half, and then let it rest. The next year you would use the other bed and a half, let it rest. Because if you think about what's going on in one of these treatment systems, is the water is infiltrating through soil. The soil grows a bacteria. That bacteria consumes the organic waste. And at the bottom, when the water comes out the other side, before it gets into the groundwater table, it's clean. So what's happening, one of the things I think that we saw a lot of around here was that the systems were old. They were very small. They may not have been designed with proper soils to conduct that kind of infiltration process. And they were just overdosed. So that soil was kind of basically like done. I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. The bacteria are dead. Maybe it's plugged. They can get blinded off. The other thing that can happen sometimes in poorly designed systems, and this would be designed to regulation, is if the bottom of the system is just a little too close to either the groundwater table or to rock. Because then if you think about it, where does the water go? I don't know where to go. So that's part of the idea Bill was mentioning when he showed you Camp New Bar. It was a raised system. It kind of has that nice little slope. That was to give additional distance for the water to travel through and distance from the groundwater table. In that case, I believe it was a groundwater table, not rock. So again, these systems are designed kind of more, if you think about, if you've ever bought equipment, you can buy sort of homeowner DeWalt power tools. You can also buy the ones that contractors use. DeWalt makes them both, but one of them is really made for everyday continuous use. The other one is made for light duty use around your house. This is kind of the same concept. These systems are designed to be very robust. The state does a very detailed review, and in their world, the last thing they want to see is a failing system of this nature. It's not good for anyone. So like Bill said, the service life on these is typically 30 years. That doesn't mean that after 30 years the universe ends. It means after 30 years we're probably needing to do some maintenance. We're probably taking out that soil and putting in new soil, and we might be checking pipes and drains and levels and all different kinds of things, but it should have a very long service life. So that's a great question.
A couple of quick announcements, and then we'll get to your question. Bill mentioned, and you started to weave around this 2016 report that's 69 pages thick of detailed proposals and specifications and so on. That is on our Duane Lake Association website now. You can go there and read the whole darn 69 pages there if you want to. And secondly, the PowerPoint presentation that he showed tonight, he has printed out, and there's a stack of them back by that door over there. Okay. So you can grab those on your way out. So.
Oh, the lady there.
I noticed this is a nice system laid out, but what happened if about 25% still dumping of the water into Duane Lake? I noticed that you did not have highlight a bunch of houses on that starts in the watershed of the Duane Lake up on Schoharie Turnpike.
Correct.
All those houses are going to be still dumping from these failing septic systems. And if you incorporate those houses, the price would be even lower.
So we actually, if you want to spend some time in that engineering report that he just mentioned, that Alan just mentioned, we actually looked at that. We actually, one of the options that we looked at was to basically do the watershed. It adds a lot of cost. At the end of the day, it adds a tremendous amount of cost. So while what you're saying is certainly something to be considered, that if we're not covering the entire watershed, there are still going to be some isolated areas where a failing septic system can certainly be, having some impact. This is one of those balancing questions. We can certainly review that. We can look at it again. It did add, I don't remember how much cost, but it was enough that and you can look at it and you can see the actual dollars. It was very costly, and it was because of the amount of pipe that we have to put in to get to those people. They're very far away. So there's other options. You could, this is not intended to be a one-size-fits-all. If you guys have spent some time on the website for the association, I see a lot of material on there about things that you can do at your homes, about capturing runoff from roads, about improving drainage. One of the things that could be considered is working with those homeowners who are in the watershed who are not part of the sewer system on improving their septic systems. So there's a lot of different things. We did look at that. It's not off the table. It was just very expensive.
There was, to cover the entire watershed, your biggest concentration is obviously right around the lake where you have the most houses, and, in this analysis, kind of get the most bang for your buck. As you start getting to the outer portions of the watershed, the lots get a little bigger, the houses get a little further apart. There's less of them on a per acre basis. So that's really what, drove the cost up by, a few $1 million, and it was only spread out amongst another, few dozen people. It wasn't double, we didn't double the people connected to the system by covering the watershed. So it is an option, and it is in the report, but, this was, the target was really the concentration right around the lake itself. Gentleman in the.
Yeah, the engineers are off the hook on this one. You can tell. The Lake Association has always been concerned with the quality of the lake water, and Alan's efforts are commendable. But one of the things that was done in the past was to limit the amount of development on the lake. And if you look on the maps, you'll see in the 1980s there was a development called the Timberland subdivision. And one of those lots has been subdivided, and the town's about to issue a permit for construct at 791 Duane Lake Road, the lot that was cleared and clear cut. And that was a passive way to control the runoff and everything else that's going wrong with the lake quality. Why is that being allowed to be built at that place when there's a real distinct set of restrictions and covenants that there could only be one home built on those properties after 1986? How is that subdivided? How is that allowed to be permitted to be built on now?
I'll answer a question for them to answer. I don't think they have the answer for that. That's not their responsibility. That's not their responsibility of the engineers to answer that question.
I know this is not the engineers. That's why I told them they're off the hook. This is addressed to the whole meeting here.
Oh, okay.
There were efforts to control the quality of the lake water, and one of those ways was to control the amount of development.
Yes.
Now you've got a lot that's been split, and the town is issuing work permits to that builder that fell in there.
The land was, the lots were split over 20 years ago.
Yeah, the lots were split, but the restriction is still on there that there's a single home to be built on a plotted lot as of May 10th, 1986. I mean, and the town tells me to go sue somebody. And everyone else says, well, I don't know anything about it. Well, I'm telling you about it. There's deed restrictions that are going to be ignored, and there's going to be development all the way around the lake. And you're worried about, suppose the sewer system doesn't go in. You're going to have 20 more septic systems, 20 more buildings that were never allowed to be built as of the Timberland deed restrictions.
Mr. Kennedy, this is a civil matter, like we discussed at many town
Yeah,
board
it's a
meetings.
civil matter, but I'm just addressed it, it relates to the quality of the lake water.
I'll take a crack at answering that question. I've studied the history of that situation, and as you know, because you and I have discussed it, but the history goes back quite a long way. And yes, when the Timberlands Consultants company issued or applied for a subdivision permit, the attorney for the town planning board specified in a letter to the developer that the permit would be granted subject to many deed restrictions that the town planning board required that there could be no further subdivision. It was in writing in the minutes of the meeting and as written up by the planning board's attorney at that time, back in the 1980s. A few years later, for reasons which are inexplicable to all of us.
Every deed, it's still in the deed.
Exactly. But as I've tried to indicate, perhaps obliquely in our newsletters, the Duane Lake Association has no financial resources to fight that in court.
All right, so there's nothing to stop anyone from building,
I can't deny that.
and I think everyone should be aware of that. You know, you
Fair point.
make a minimal effort to get this water cleared up, but if you got a switch like Zerillo that says, I'm gonna split it, and the town says, okay, you can split it, and they say there's no deed restriction, I mean, I got all the minutes from those meetings
Okay.
20 years ago.
I know, you've researched it too.
The town was lied to.
At the present time, the only thing that the Duane Lake Association has in its toolbox right now is social pressure to communicate vigorously with all parties that it is forbidden. Please don't do it. But if they do it, we do not have the legal resources to fight it.
They took down 150 trees, and you got all that runoff
Right.
running right into the lake, and you're trying to
Right.
offset it with systems, and people spending thousands of dollars, when you just need to have some good stewardship of what's there. People clear cut their property, you get all this runoff, and
Your points are
lake
well taken and
quality
valid.
suffers.
Your points are valid, but I think we have
I
done
think
all
you
we can do.
surrendered. I think you surrendered. Nobody showed up to the town to give them any pressure. You got town officials, it's great that they show up, but they run unopposed. You can't vote them out.
We have not
You know, you
surrendered.
got no clout.
We've not surrendered by any means. We've done I think all we can do.
Well, with that lot you did, you didn't even write a letter to the town saying, hey, could you look into this?
How do you know that?
Well, they never brought it up at the meetings.
Well,
And
I've
I
had
was
lots
the
of,
only one at the town meetings from over here.
I do things more quietly.
Yeah, okay. But the result is the same. Guy cuts down a hole, clear cuts the property, and what's to stop all those other 12 property owners from doing the same thing?
I think
And if you get sewers, they might say, oh, now you can have quarter-acre
Okay.
lots.
I think we need to go on to other things, but I will say that also DEC has been involved and has been found to be somewhat at fault here. DEC has not exercised all their authorities here. I've had lots of discussions with them. They have recently at least contacted the developer, the builder, and required that they at least put in silt barriers. Small victory? Yes, very small.
Well, the builder, if you look on the Bureau of Prisons website, you'll see that he's a federal felon. So I doubt if he's going to follow anyone's rules.
Well, he has a.
Just for
Okay.
information purposes.
You have a question or a comment?
I don't have a question. This is a meeting on a different subject. Your points are very valid, sir. Excuse me, 1 second. Your points are very valid. That's been a very lively issue and a topic of discussion for, 18 months at the board meetings. It has been presented to the town in various ways. It's been presented to DEC. I don't think you're present at those meetings. So give us the respect to understand that there's been a lot done. There's only so much that can be done, and let's please try to stay on topic for the balance of this evening. Thank you.
All right, you said for $2,300 a year, we could get in on this plan. Now, my question is, how much benefit to the quality of the water would this sewer system actually accomplish? With blue algae and this, that, and the other thing, what percentage of the problems is caused by the sewer situation?
That's a wonderful question. It is also extremely hard to answer honestly. So there are many ways. Bill referenced earlier that we did a lot of work in New York City's watershed. And folks may be familiar with that. New York City, in 1996, the Safe Drinking Water Act was adopted that said that communities who were providing surface water for drinking water purposes needed to filter that water. So they could no longer just take that water out of a lake or a river, put chlorine in it, and give it to folks to drink. They needed to filter it to remove protozoan bacteria. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 110 people died in 1990 because of protozoan bacteria. So collectively, we got together as a nation and said, that's unacceptable, we need to filter our drinking water. Everyone did, even to the point where places like Los Angeles and Boston and many, many, many places spent literally billions of dollars to filter their drinking water. New York City didn't do that because it was many, many billions of dollars. Instead, what they decided to do was go try to attack sources of contamination, at their source to protect their drinking water so that they could continue to simply chlorinate it and serve it to roughly 11 million people. They do that to this day. They do divert a small portion of it and filter it. In doing those projects, one of the questions that was asked was, to the extent that we eliminate septic systems in New York City's drinking watershed, which is enormous, when you're on Route 90 and you go through Schoharie, you are touching the top of it. It's huge. What is the value or benefit of this? So there have been numerous models that are created that look at the geology, the geography, land cover, how much is impervious surface, how much is rocks, how much are cows, how much is this, how much is that. And they're models, they're computer models. So they're based on some data, but then there's a series of assumptions that are made to say, okay, if I eliminate sources of nitrogen and phosphorus from septic systems, what's the value or benefit to the water body? And they basically say, over time, there will be a benefit. Can we predict how much? Can we say that in 2 or 3 years you'll see less algae? Not with great certainty. What we can say is that your water body is unquestionably in decline. You, if you've lived here for a while, you have seen visibly that change in water quality, and you have seen it change pretty precipitously recently. There are reasons for that. You haven't had a lot of change around the lake in terms of land use. It's pretty much the same houses doing the same things. But what we have seen is we have seen the effect of more intense rainstorms. They have changed a lot of things in terms of the water cycle and watersheds. So we are seeing that. We're also seeing in a very small lake that has a very limited capacity to absorb nutrients, they bioaccumulate. They tend to hang around. They don't get cleaned out by the natural processes. So again, you're seeing that rapid degradation in water quality. Does cutting off a pretty significant source of nitrogen and phosphorus help? Absolutely. Can I tell you that in 5 years you're going to have a pristine lake with no milfoil in it and no algae? No. Can I say that if you don't do this and you don't do something to arrest that introduction of nutrients, the water quality will continue to degrade? Yes. Like I said, there are many models that attribute various quantities of nitrogen and phosphorus to different things in a watershed. They'll look and say, okay, so impervious surfaces, meaning roads, buildings, parking areas, those kinds of things, will assign a value to those and say, because the sediment from those carries a certain quantity, we can go test that, carries a certain quantity of nitrogen and phosphorus, we can say that if there's this much acreage, it's contributing this much. We can say, okay, we've got 86 residential septic systems. Let's just make an assumption they're all a certain type of system with a certain discharge. We can do some math. We got a nice math person over here. We can do some math. But at the end of the day, they're models. So it's one of these issues where, again, we can guarantee if you do nothing, water quality will continue to decline. That is for sure. If you do something, you can arrest that to a degree. In your situation, given your watershed, given the land uses in your watershed, given the lack of substantial impervious cover, meaning there's no Walmart with a giant parking lot here to give you a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus from that source, it is very likely that septic systems are a big part of this, just because of the nature of your watershed. So I can't honestly tell you in a certain number of years you're going to have a perfect lake again. What I can say is that anything that you choose to do as a lake association to try to arrest that decline in water quality by preventing nutrients from getting into the lake, meaning, you know, maybe working on the drain, the storm drain system around the roads, looking at those kinds of things, that will help. This is one of those deals where it's a process of 1,000 cuts. It's doing many small things and sometimes very large things that over time do add up to improve water quality. So it's kind of an answer. It's the best that we can do. We understand it's expensive to do this. It is. But we, again, looking at the nature of your watershed, when we look at what are the sources of nitrogen and phosphorus, again, we don't see huge areas of impervious surface. We do have some agriculture around here, but I mentioned that I'm from the Finger Lakes, and the scale of agriculture out there is enormous compared to this. We don't have dairy cows out doing in the fields what dairy cows do. That's a huge source of nitrogen and phosphorus. We don't have that here. So as we kind of look at where is the nitrogen and phosphorus coming from, septic systems are probably a good chunk of it.
I have a question. That $6 million that we spoke about earlier, it's based on an educated guess, or is it based on assuming that we're going to have a grinder pump for all 96 units? Or would it behoove us to look at trying to, I know the pumps you're trying to use are probably environmental ones or something similar to that. With that being said, I know they're robust pumps. Is it a feasibility that we could group maybe 2 or 3 camps onto one stationary facility that would cut the cost down significantly?
Yep. So, and Bill, jump in, but the engineering report that's on the website has detailed cost estimates that go through and say how much did we assume for the cost of a pump, and it's an installed cost. We used an average, and we used the ones that we installed locally. So we used sort of a real life, it didn't come from a book, real life thing. No design has been done. We're just gonna say no design has been done. One of our jobs is to be conservative. Remember we had that timeline that took us out to construction in 2023? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what the price of gas is gonna be tomorrow, let alone the cost of construction equipment in 2023. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to have some kind of flexibility in there. Our goal is to give you a cost that we hope doesn't go up, but it could certainly go down. So the answer is absolutely, we would look at ways to reduce those costs. In this case, yeah, each grinder pump, I believe we budgeted around $12,000, something like that, to put it in the ground and have it installed and do those things. That's probably pretty close to the mark, regardless of which brand we use. They're all kind of similar. Again, our job, and could we put in some duplex? And we a lot of times we're dealing with people who have the loops and lollipops developments where it's the little cul-de-sac, and you can put everybody in a duplex and just have one pump. You kind of don't really have that here, but you may have some opportunities to do that. When we get to design, that's when we're really trying to get into those details and again reduce costs. So the answer is absolutely. We'll definitely look at all of those kinds of options, but our goal is to try to give you sort of a big picture cost. And again, in that engineering report, it goes through in great detail. We put the linear feet of pipe we assumed for the collection system, $1 per linear foot, all in cost, meaning put it in, buy the pipe, do the bedding, backfill, restoration, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, the $6 million is all broken out in there for you to see. It is a big number, and we completely understand. Do you remember how many linear feet of pipe we were talking about? It's like 11 or 12,000.
Yeah, I think it was around 20,000 feet of pipe around the lake.
20,000 feet of pipe.
One of the other things with it, the engineering report that was done between 2016 and 2017, we didn't hit that $6 million number then. The $6 million number we put here, we got to with an escalator from that, it was 5.2 or 5.3. So yes, we're trying to be conservative and round up. We need to dig back into that a little bit and confirm it's 6. You know, they're estimates, it's a round number. We try to be conservative with it, again, realizing that that report was done, you know, 2.5, 3 years ago. And we're looking at a project another 2.5, 3 years out before we're, you know, buying the pump, buying the fuel, you know, all that kind of good
Absolutely.
stuff.
I'd like to take a crack at answering your question, ma'am, about will this solve the problem? To borrow words from Ward Freeman, he's commonly reminding us that our phosphorus comes from 4 different sources. It comes from upstream, whether it's agriculture, there's a small cattle feedlot upstream a little bit, some horses upstream, there's a golf course upstream. All those supply nutrients to the water coming into our lake. That's source number 1. Source number 2 is our own backyard septic systems. There's 2. The third one would be the roadside runoff. Every time there's a rainstorm, it washes through the ditches on the roadside, down the ditches from there to the lake. That provides phosphorus into the lake, or nutrients into the lake. And the fourth one is our lake bottom itself. The mud under the lake provides phosphorus to the ecosystem. Which of those is the most guilty? We don't really know. We're trying to find out. We've been talking to a couple of college environmental engineering departments about having them do a computerized kind of a lake model to do some estimating, or even with data, figure out where it is coming from. But while we're trying to do all that, an opportunity has now fallen into our lap, perhaps. So we have a decision to make before our knowledge becomes perfect. I can tell you that in regard to the upstream agriculture situation, about a year ago we invited in Cornell Cooperative Extension Agriculture Department to do some gentle consulting work with the farmer involved. And they're now reporting to me through the Soil and Water Conservation District that they are having some success convincing this individual to implement some remediation measures, as they call them, similar to what they do in the New York City watershed and the Catskills, where they provide funding to the farmer to clean up his act, basically. This is now underway for that farm upstream. We don't see the results yet, but it's underway. And as far as the roadside ditches are concerned, about 2 months ago, my son and I installed the first batch of silt barriers on one of the main sources of phosphorus-laden silt and sediment going to the lake. There need to be more. So those other things need to be done, and we shouldn't forget those. But meanwhile, maybe here's this opportunity. Do we accept it with imperfect knowledge, or do we not? That's the question.
Can we do one last one? What's the percentage of voters over under that make this pass?
That make it pass.
Yeah, that make it pass. What's your percentage have to be?
So there's, and we have representatives from the town here, but my understanding is that that the Lake Association has said we have an interest in this, and they've approached the town. So it's not the other way around. The town is not coming and saying, we're going to impose a system on you. So this is really something that is very organic here among you as property owners. If at the end of the day, and Roger, John, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys say, hey, nope, pass, don't want a sewer system, the town's going to say, okay, thank you for your interest, I got a lot of other things to deal with. So really, at the end of the day, this is about your community, lake community, deciding this is something
Well, I'm
that
going to assume
you
there's going
wanna
to be a
do.
referendum somewhere down the road.
So the district formation process happens in 2 ways under the town law, and these are, again, if you can't sleep tonight, Town Law Article 12 or 12A. Article 12 is a district is formed on petition of the property owners. A certain number of property owners get together representing an assessed value in the area. They fill out a petition. There's all kinds of legal requirements for that, and they send it to the town and they say, we want you to create a assessment, a taxing jurisdiction over the top of us. In that case, there is no vote. And the reason there is no vote is because it's been petitioned. A whole bunch of people got together and said, I want this. So you don't get a second bite at the apple, right? So in that case,
what's the
no vote.
percentage that have to ask?
I can't remember. In that case, it's a certain amount of the assessed value, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can get that for you, and you can put it on the website. In the other method, which is to Article 12A, is on action of the town board. And in that case, the way the law is written is that the town would, we have this thing called a map plan and report, which is like an engineering report, kind of like what Bill had. It goes into a little more detail about what we're building, who's affected, how much does it cost, what's the plan of finance, some other things like that. That document, either way, there's one of those made, but that document is the subject of a public hearing. Everybody gets to come, say their piece. After the public hearing, if any adjustments need to be made, they are. Then the town board is making a statement of findings. And what they're doing is they're saying, on balance, given the information that we've been given and what we heard at the public hearing, is this project a public benefit? If the answer is it is a public benefit, the town makes a certain set of certifications, for instance, that those who are benefited are in and they're going to pay, those who aren't are not, good stuff like that. The town adopts a resolution. That resolution is subject to permissive referendum. Permissive referendum means that people who are in the district could say, I want to vote. Okay, so they ask to vote, and then there's a vote, and it's a referendum vote up or down. And that is literally 51-49 up or down, right? And it's only people in the district. So people who live off in the hinterlands don't get to say, because they're not going to pay for it. The other option, and I think in this case this might be the way this would go, is under New York state law, anything that's subject to permissive referendum, meaning people get to ask, could be subject to mandatory referendum, meaning automatically there's a vote. So if that's the route that goes, and we're back to it's an automatic, it's a vote, it's again only the people in the district, and it's 51-49, and you're literally saying, do you want this to happen or not? So again, I think I've represented that accurately. This really is something that is generated by this community, and that the town doesn't have an interest in making anybody do anything, but if it's something the community wants, the town is here to support you and to help make this happen. The other thing I will tell you is, having worked with the town in the last couple of sewer projects here, not to be, to diminish anything, but the town works very, very hard and spends countless hours doing these projects. The commitment of the community, and to have town leaders who support and who want to do whatever the public wants to do. I gotta tell you, we work from Plattsburgh down to the New York City area, over to the Binghamton area. Our geography is pretty big. I put about 45,000 miles on my car a year. We don't run across a lot of town leaders like yours. They're wonderful people and they want to do the right thing. So that's kind of the process. So at the end of the day, now remember that that's kind of in our little timeline here. That's out there a bit. Where are we? There we go. So that's down here, finalize a district 2021. So that's pretty far out. So the idea would be, by then, perhaps you know more about your watershed and contributions to your watershed. By then you know what kind of grant support you have. You've had updated cost estimates. We know what interest rates are a little bit better because it is a year from now, those kinds of things. And then you're in a position to say up or down vote, yes or no.
One last thing. Alan, help me. I might be ignorant. Is there a footage, lakefront footage, you have to have in order to build, to get a permit? I know the lots are mostly 110s, right?
Stand close to me.
The zoning ordinance would take care of that. The zoning ordinance specifies lot size.
Okay. My understanding from rumors are there's some lots that are unbuildable because they're not big enough on the lakefront.
And so then we'll get into the question of what is grandfathered in or not.
Okay. So there could be somebody with a lot they cannot build on, but have to pay for the system.
Possibly. I can't rule it out, but maybe, I don't know.
So in a lot of cases, and this comes to when we form the district. So we form the district, that map plan and report thing that I kind of poo-pooed, it's actually kind of important because it outlines stuff like that. And what it would say would be, we run across this in lake communities frequently, where because of when the real property was subdivided was probably in 1950, and there might not have even been zoning regulations at that point, and a lot of structures were camps, so we didn't need a lot of geography, those kinds of things. People's septic systems were 55-gallon, drums with holes in them and rocks in the bottom. We've seen a lot of those. So in forming the district, a decision has to be made. It, to me, is undue to charge someone the full load for a property that they can't build on. But I don't live here.
It wouldn't be fair to charge them anything if they can't build on it.
Well, because one of the things that can happen with small unbuildable lots, particularly when there's now public sewers available, is they magically become very attractive to the next door neighbor to purchase them and make them into a buildable lot. or to delete and combine with a neighboring lot, or to, so there's some logic to be thought about. And one of the things that we do is when we get to the detailed analysis, one of the things that we do, we have this wonderful stuff called GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. All of this information about these parcels, all the tax information, who owns them, the size, all that kind of stuff. We take that information, we overlay the zoning requirements, and we can actually identify which ones meet zoning requirements. We can then go another step and say, okay, it might not meet, you know, perhaps it's a lot that's buildable, but you could put a doghouse on it without getting an area variance to get within, say, septics and those kinds of things. We can do, if this makes sense, an analysis of that to say, what is realistic? What is really truly an unbuildable lot? What is really a lot that could be built on, but maybe in a very limited way? You know, so maybe it's not a 4-bedroom, you know, 2-story house, but maybe something like that. So when we get to district formation, one of the things that's really important about the district is making those determinations, because that all has to be very transparent in that document to say exactly how is everyone being treated. A sewer district is a taxing jurisdiction. That's what it is, and it's very, very hard. It's about taxing people. So one of the things that really comes into play with sewer districts is constitutionality and equal protection under the law. Everybody has to be treated equally, fairly. So that's one of the things that we would do when we get to that point is go through and do a very detailed analysis. Usually for lake communities, what happens in that case is we're back here killing you with more information and going through that in great detail. A lot of times we have a laptop, we have an Excel spreadsheet, every single property, every property owner, all the sizes, where they fit, where they don't fit, all of that kind of thing, and we work through that process. So again, we try to make that make sense. As Alan said, a lot of this is dictated by the zoning. And just because maybe something doesn't have exactly the right dimension doesn't mean that that property owner couldn't go get an area variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and still be able to build something on the property. There may be others. You don't have a lot of these. Sometimes we see these weird triangle-shaped lots in places where you have curves. You don't have a lot of those, but those are almost unbuildable because you can't get setbacks. You don't have too many that are weirdly shaped like that. But again, we do that kind of analysis when we get there.
I suspect from watching the audience that, from the body language, that we're getting close to the end here. So I would remind all of you to keep your eye on the Duane Lake website. There'll be ample opportunity there for communication both ways, surveys going out, chances for you to ask questions, and so on. So please take a look at that. One last item I'd like to address Mr. Haight's question, and that is about the zoning. About 4 years ago, roughly, the town changed its zoning ordinance. Before that, the zoning ordinance said in a lake district that if a sewer system were put in, the lot sizes could be automatically reduced. And when we saw that this zoning change was being offered, much to our amazement, the town board accepted our proposal that clause be removed so that lot sizes could not be automatically downsized because of a sewer line. That change is now in effect. I'm also reminded, though, of a book I read many years ago called The Zoning Game he was a zoning attorney, Richard Babcock. The Zoning Game was an apt title, and in that book, he said that the problem with zoning is it's always under pressure to change. There's always somebody who wants to get a smaller lot, and they're always looking for zoning exemptions or changes to the zoning law so they can get a lot built. Lots of purchase agreements being written subject to zoning change. So the price is eternal vigilance. You have to, your association and you, all of you, have to keep your eye on that and make sure that those modifications to zoning just don't happen. You can't let them happen. Mike, you had one more question, then we'll close it off after Mike.
We can have smaller lots now based upon the sewer thing? Oh, good.
No.
Okay, good. The other thing is too, for building purposes for our sewer district coming out, that's going to be changing every year, and the town will be looking over that, right? Administering that?
In terms of?
Of costs of maintaining?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And the back charges.
So the way the town does this, and I have to, again, I'm fans of the way the town works here. In the town's budget, there are separate budgets annually for each of the sewer systems. So you'll see one for the Delanson system, one for Mariahville, one for Duanesburg, and they line out very specifically what all of those costs are. So that, and then at the bottom is what the charge is to the homeowner. And that's done annually. The board evaluates what the cost from the prior year was. Are there any anticipated improvements that need to be made? Those kinds of things. And the board adjusts that annually. One of the costs that would be associated with this is actually a very low cost system from the operation and maintenance on the town side but is the occasional, the needing to mow and make sure that the field is maintained, but occasionally pumping out that very large septic tank. That's the kind of thing that I would think the town would put out to bid on occasional basis, make sure they're getting good pricing, those kinds of things. But yes, the costs are evaluated by the town. On the debt service side of things, if the town uses that state revolving fund money, the interest rate that you get when you close is just like anything else. You don't know what that interest rate is until the day you close, but they're pretty stable because it's public bonding. The way that works is whatever that interest rate is, the state holds that interest rate. It never goes up, ever, through the whole life of the borrowing. And if the state has an opportunity to reduce it, they will. They send you a love note saying, would you like your interest rate to go down? You check a box, say yes. You, meaning our supervisor, checks as a box saying yes. It magically goes down. They send you a new debt schedule. So it's one of the greatest things about that borrowing. It is guaranteed. It is not variable. It is not a fluctuating rate. It is what it is. If it can go down, it does. And then that would be reflected in your annual cost.
Many thanks to all who went gooding over the sidelines over here, but it's time to wrap it up. You can ask who's probably afterwards.
And don't forget the roving piece.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.